This is We Need to Talk with Dr. Darcy Sterling, where I give you the tools and skills you need to love better so you can live better. Today, we're talking about something most of us have either gone through ourselves or witnessed in the lives of those we care about, but it is rarely talked about. It's that experience of being in a relationship when things just feel off. Things feel strained, connection feels off, red flags, they are stacking up, and yet we come up with explanations that keep us hanging on. Maybe we tell ourselves it's just a phase. Maybe we think we can fix it. Meanwhile, our loved ones are seeing the writing on the wall way before we do. So why are we often the last to recognize when the person that we're dating or love has already checked out or that they're incompatible with us? Why do we hold on even as the reality becomes harder and harder to ignore? What I find so interesting is that this isn't only about missing signs, it's about what those signs actually mean to us. Maybe acknowledging them would mean confronting the fear of loneliness. Maybe it challenges our self-worth. Sometimes we hold on, not because the relationship is good for us, but because we've invested so much that letting go feels like we're admitting defeat. Today, we're diving into the psychology of this slow recognition. Why do we stay when everything points to the end? And how much of this blindness is about self-preservation rather than love? Whether you're in a shaky relationship now or you're helping someone else come to terms with one, this conversation is going to be a juicy one. And I know that because here to help me with it is my niece and co-host, Ashton Tardif.
Why do we cling to the idea of what a relationship could be rather than what it actually is? It's like we romanticize potential over reality when it comes to romantic relationships at times.
It's because potential is so seductive. It is hope. When we are in love or really invested, it is so easy to see possibilities rather than limitations. We become like emotionally attached to an idealized version of our partner. And I would also argue to the relationship itself, one where things just feel out of reach, yet somehow worth holding on to. There are things that we are clear are missing, but we're clinging to hope. Human beings are incredibly hopeful. There's a comforting sense of control that comes from the belief that things can get better, that if we just try harder, things are going to turn around. So potential gives us hope, and hope becomes that glue that binds us even when reality doesn't match up. But this attachment to potential can also keep us in relationships that don't truly serve us. We essentially gamble what could be as opposed to evaluating the present reality, which can feel safer in the short term, but it often leaves us stuck in unfulfilling relationships in the long term.
And I feel like for some people, depending on where they are in their life age-wise, they would almost prefer to stay in a relationship where they think that things can get better versus having to go back out there and find a new partner and start over because, you know, they're like, oh, I'm like in my late 30s, early 40s. Do I really want to go out there again and do this? Like, can I just live with this? Is that okay? I think that might be more of an age feeling, but if you think I'm wrong there, feel free to correct me. But I feel like that's what I would feel like if I was older. Because now I'm just like, hey, it's not working out. Peace out.
I think you're right. I think that what we know from the research is that the longer we're with a partner, the more invested we are, the tighter we clench to it, the less likely we are to let it go. The length of our relationship directly correlates to the likelihood of us staying together. We're much less invested the shorter the relationship, and we're much more likely to let go of it. And yeah, I didn't quite understand what you were saying at first, but what I hear you saying, if I'm hearing you right, is that as we get older, we're even less inclined to let go of a relationship that's not fulfilling. And if that's what you were saying.
Yeah, no, it was.
Yeah, I agree.
So then, taking out age or coupling with age, is it harder to leave a relationship when nothing big has gone wrong? Like it's just a gradual wearing down of the relationship. There's not one big catastrophic event where you're like, oh, we have to break up. It's just like a creeping feeling.
Yeah, it's often so much harder to leave a relationship when there is not a single glaring issue, like no big betrayal or explosive argument. So
Hmm.
when it's a simple, slow, steady decline in connection or a mounting list of small red flags, it creates a gray area that is harder to act on. We are conditioned to think of breakups as being justified by the major unmistakable problems. And when nothing overtly terrible's happened, it can feel unjustified to end things. The
Hmm.
problem with that is that staying when you don't have a big reason often results in compounding dissatisfaction. And over time, that can lead to resentment and like you feeling like a martyr, like you're doing so much more than your partner is.
Hmm.
And on the one hand, we're trying to be fair to our partner that's posing this in the most positive light I can imagine. But in reality, we are dismissing our own needs. And ultimately, this kind of gradual disconnect might be just as powerful a reason as any major red flag if we allow ourselves to view it that way.
Hmm. Speaking of flags, I have something I call yellow flags because sometimes something's not quite a red flag, but it's like, all right, I'm going to keep an eye on this. Would you say that several yellow flags compounding over time can potentially be more destructive than maybe like one red flag?
I just don't know why you won't come into the family business with your clever brain and your new, fresh perspective on seeing things. Yellow flags are my new favorite thing. I've never heard of them until just now.
Oh,
And
really?
yes, yeah, no, I'm a Virgo. It's black and white. Shit is either good or bad. Like, it's like and the stuff that rubs me wrong. I'm one of those people who thinks that, I can outperform it. I can outperform discomfort. And historically, or should I say presently, that's proven to be true. I do think that yellow flags, so you have to decide for yourself and others, maybe Ashton, how many yellow flags constitutes one red flag. I say
Right.
probably five yellow flags or
Oh,
three
I was
is
gonna
like,
say three.
yeah, three. I think three yellow flags is the equivalent of like a light red yellow. I mean, I could make
Hmm.
so many subdivisions. And it's really important to be registering these slight mismatches. Is that what you
Hmm.
mean?
Yeah, because those can compound over time and depending on like where you see the relationship going, a yellow flag could just be a yellow flag in the early stages of a relationship, but as you go deeper and deeper and you think about marriage or a longer term partnership, you might be like, "Oh, this was fine when we were casually dating, but I actually don't want to live with this the rest of my life."
That's
Um,
such a great distinction, and that's so real and valid. There are plenty of things you can live with if you don't have to live with it.
right, right. And I think that I was inspired to bring that up just because my current partner and I had a conversation, like a check-in, because we were inspired by you and Steph, and we just both disclosed with each other like very small things. I don't even know if I would call them yellow flags, maybe beige flags if we're getting into a spectrum.
The color of
And
my blouse.
exactly. And it created a larger conversation of like, hey, just noticing this, like I'm okay right now, but like long term, if this were to continue, like I would not want that for my partner. And I think it's a really fair thing to call out, especially early on, because it allows the other person to have time to correct that behavior if they're able to and if they want to.
Or exactly, or to assess whether or not this is something that they
Or it's
do
a
want to
match.
course correct.
Right.
Right. Is it,
Exactly.
do we feel compatible? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and it's so interesting how the timing of this episode corresponded with that conversation. So here's an interesting question. Is denial about the end of a relationship a form of self-protection or sabotage?
So at first, denial feels protective from the immediate pain of
Mhm.
loss and fear of being alone. It's also a natural response to avoid the vulnerability and the uncertainty that comes with admitting that a relationship is over. We hold
Mhm.
on to familiar routines and shared memories and the sense of identity that we've built around this other person in the relationship, which all, you know, provide some sense of stability, even if it's not entirely rooted in reality, mostly in a felt sense of stability. That said, over time, this protective mechanism can shift into sabotage. Like by refusing to acknowledge the end, we prolong our pain or our lack of joy and fulfillment, and we delay our healing process. We close ourselves off from healthier opportunities. We sacrifice our own well being when we stay in a relationship that no longer serves us, which can reinforce this cycle of being unfulfilled and feeling frustrated. And then that becomes a barrier to growth because it prevents us from exploring who we are outside of the relationship and potentially from finding a more compatible and fulfilling connection. It's interesting because it does feel protective at first, yet ultimately self sabotaging. And what is really damaging over time is the absence of fulfillment and it's almost like sometimes we gaslight ourselves.
Which like directly segues into my next question, just because we don't realize that something isn't good for us, or we're refusing to realize that something isn't good for us, more often than not, our friends and our family will, and they're going to want better for us. And that's always tricky to navigate on both sides of the table. And I've been in both seats. I feel like I've been in seats where I'm like, oh my God, I just want to grab my friend by the shoulders and be like, him leaving you or you leaving him is the best thing that could ever happen to you. And of course, I've had family who felt the same way with some of my boyfriends. So, how do you recommend that friends and family handle the tension of wanting to protect a loved one while respecting their autonomy and like also not isolating them? Because you bear that risk when you criticize someone's partner or
Boy,
you
do
know.
you. Boy, do
Yeah.
you. So when loved ones see red flags in a relationship, can be incredibly challenging to strike just the right balance between expressing concern and respecting
Mhm.
the person's autonomy. Friends and family are often caught in this double bind. They want to protect the person that they care about, but they also don't want to risk pushing them away or causing tension in the relationship. It's the reason why so often that feedback goes unspoken. I would say the first consideration, though, is this. Has your loved one actually expressed that they want feedback? Because
Mm.
not everyone
Yeah.
does. And when relationships don't work out, people often start sharing their honest thoughts too late, prompting the reaction of, where the hell was this feedback all along?
Mhm.
So you're the person who didn't get honest feedback about the person you were dating. I would say it's worth reflecting on how you conveyed or didn't convey an openness to that honesty if that's what you want next time
Mhm.
around. I think you have to ask yourself, did I give the people around me permission to be honest? And either way, I think you need to take a different approach next time because it clearly didn't work. Um, I think that it's also fair to check in with loved ones over time because people's impressions, just like your impression with your partner is going to evolve over time, your
Mhm.
loved ones' impressions of your partner are going to evolve as they get to know them more.
Yeah.
So, for those on the outside, if you are confident that the person wants your honest perspective, it is critical to be intentional about how you offer that feedback. Words are
Yeah.
really hard to walk back, even if you phrase it perfectly. Your loved one who's in the relationship that you're concerned about could naively repeat your words to their partner. And if that happens, you risk creating friction between you and their partner and
Mhm.
even losing access to your loved one altogether. Sometimes just one blunt or ill timed comment can be the catalyst for like a huge disconnect in a relationship. With that in mind, I would say that and this style destroys my soul because this is not my way of moving through the world. It kind of kills me to even suggest this strategy, but I think it's the right one. Friends and family might want to opt for planting a seed, which is to say, expressing thoughts through like open ended questions or reflecting back things that they're hearing from the person. It could be as easy as like saying, hey, I'm always here to talk if something feels off. And this way, if concerns grow, you know, the person you care about has a safe, non judgmental space to turn to. And if things go well, you have respected their autonomy throughout the whole relationship.
Mhm.
This balancing act is more about creating an open door for the person you care about to speak when they are ready, rather than pushing them to see things that they might not be prepared to face yet. It's a balancing act, and it can be really tricky. I'm curious about your thoughts on this one.
Well, having come from like a past relationship where I did kind of look around after it had ended in the way that it did, which was horrible. Everyone knows that already. I did get feedback from a lot of people, and I was so surprised at, not so surprised, but I think I was more surprised at the amount of people who felt the way that they did. I knew that some people had maybe concerns, but hearing after the relationship ended that almost universally everyone felt this way or very close to it, that they didn't, think he was a great fit for me, yada, yada. It was a bit shocking. And my question to them was always like, well, why didn't you tell me? And
That's a
almost
great question to ask people.
and everyone and now I understand. And I wasn't angry. I was just kind of like curious, like, why didn't you tell me? And almost everyone had responded and said, well, for most of that relationship, you seemed so happy. Like you were genuinely happy. And I think that's something, and correct me if I'm wrong, that is important to take into consideration. If you do have a red flag about somebody that someone's dating, okay, is this person happy? Are they healthy? Like, how are they? What does their life look like? And I have to give them credit. They're like, we didn't want to ruin this for you, and they didn't. And am I glad that they didn't tell me some of the flags? And maybe the first year and a half, yeah. But as things got more serious and we were making life decisions together, maybe I could have taken a little bit more criticism because we were about to move in together, and that's a big decision. But I don't hold anyone accountable. I'm not angry at anyone for not telling me, but that's me. Someone else could take it very differently.
But
Um,
can I weigh in as one of the loved ones who
yeah,
probably
for sure.
didn't weigh in during the relationship? Because let me explain why. The flags were more yellow, to use your
Hmm.
terms. And also, I saw no harm in the relationship for right now. Would I have
Right.
wanted you to enter a marriage with either of your exes? No disrespect to either of them, although one of them did disrespect you, and for that, I'm upset. Um, no, like
Yeah.
I wouldn't have wanted either of those relationships to materialize into marriage.
Hmm.
Um, they both struck me as good enough for right now, and I'm not evaluating every relationship you're in as potential marriage
Because
material.
I wasn't there then. I wasn't looking for a husband when I was dating. I was just looking to see, can I be in a long-term relationship? And
Hmm.
then I'll like figure out the rest of it. Caveating off that, do you think that there's a level of how important your feedback is to share when it comes to red flags, knowing what a person is looking for? So let's say I was looking for marriage. I'm like, I want to be married in a year. Would you have been more apt to share your concern?
Absolutely. I
Okay.
totally would have, if I knew that you were looking for your forever relationship, you would have heard my opinion, which I had pretty well formed within 3 or 4 months of you guys, both of you guys being, yeah, definitely. And I
Okay.
would have said, I like both of these guys for now. But if you're truly looking to like lock this down legally, I would say, let's have a talk about my concerns if you're open to them.
I mean, I would be, but I can imagine being on the receiving end because who is going to be like, oh, you have someone would say that to you. And of course, you want to know what they're going to say, even if you're like clenching inside. Like,
Yeah.
it's hard, but you want the best for your friends and your family. And like, I think now, after that last relationship, I do take feedback from the people closest to me very heavily. Like, I consider it very heavily, and it means a lot more to me than it ever did before. On that note, like when does offering perspective turn into pushing? Because I think you can weigh in on something and then you can be actually like pushing them. So are you guys still dating? Like, when are you going to call this off? Like, how do you know when it's time to like step back or step in?
That's such a good question. The tipping point between offering perspective versus pushing, uh,
Intervention.
this distinction about recognizing subtle cues in the person's responses and checking in on your own motivations. I would say both of those things are a good starting point. Like, start by asking yourself, why do I want to offer feedback, and maybe take into what account, well, like what you, Ashton, just said to our listeners out there. Um, does the person seem on course, or have they expressed a desire to lock it down in marriage or an engagement? And if so, you know, that is a motivation to
Mhm.
express yourself more clearly. You have to know why you're offering that feedback. Friends and family have to start by gauging whether their loved one also seems receptive to the outside opinion. Are they asking questions? Do they seem open, reflective, curious, or are they shutting down or getting defensive? So,
Mhm.
signs of defensiveness are an indication that person is not ready to hear critical feedback. And it doesn't matter how well intended it is. Your
Mhm.
intention is not the point. Well, yes, your your motivation is one of the points. Your intention is not, because people can always frame things as, I'm doing it for them. I just want my loved one to really question whether or not this is the right relationship. So one way to avoid pushing is to frame your perspective. Again, this is also something that is not the most natural for me, because I really like to just be honest and transparent and direct with, but that's not where we are in this conversation, and that's not what this set of circumstances really requires of us. I would frame the feelings, the perspective as feelings rather than truths or facts. So maybe instead of saying, "I think your partner's not right for you," maybe say, I don't know why I keep finding myself worrying about you. Does anything feel off to you? Or I don't know, maybe
Yeah.
say, I'd like, what I would say to you is like, obviously nobody is going to ever be good enough for you, Ashton. Um,
That's not true.
that said, if anything ever does feel off or you want to talk things out with me, I'm totally here for it. And this way, the focus is about my experience. It doesn't come across as judgment, because
Right.
the last thing you want is to you don't want to lob judgment onto your loved one.
Mhm.
You have to be mindful of your own emotional investment. Sometimes we become too invested in the outcome of our loved one's relationship, and everyone's
Yeah.
relationship is their own. Like, people are entitled to either be open to feedback or not. And
Mhm.
obviously, you know that I've had opinions about your exes while you dated them. And I've always found that giving you like a safe, consistent place to turn to keeps the door open in case you want to talk. But I am also mindful of respecting your autonomy and your right to make your own decisions and mistakes. And
Mhm.
again, this conversation isn't about concerns or safety. It's not about huge red flags. That's not what this conversation or this
Right.
episode is about. I can assure you, if that ever happens, I am pushing in, whether you
And
want to
I
hear it or
thank you
not.
for that. I do.
But
Um,
that's a different episode. But,
it
what we're
is.
talking about today is more about seeing long-term compatibility between your loved one and the person that they're in a relationship with.
Yeah, and I will also say, like, personally, like, I try to always look at my friends' relationships from the lens of, okay, are they happy? Because I really disliked one of my good friends' boyfriends, and from the start, just character flaws, whatever. But he made her so happy, and he was treating her mostly well. So I kept things quiet, and then I noticed a huge shift in her energy and her behavior, and she seemed visibly despondent, dejected, like the unhappiness was there, and I knew it was because of him. So that's when I like kind of used that as a segue, and you can tell me if I fucked that one up. But I basically was like, "Hey, I've just noticed you seem a little depressed lately. Do you think that is because of what's going on with insert person's name here? I almost said it, but I didn't.
Literally, who we're both biting our tongues. I don't even know who you're talking about, but I know who you're talking about. Go on.
Honestly, this has happened to me in my interpersonal friendships twice at the same time this month in very similar scenarios. So for me, that was the perfect segue because I had kept my mouth completely shut. And I reached a point where I'm like, okay, my friend is really not doing well. And I know this is the reason. So I'm going to use this opportunity to maybe shed some light in a loving way and be like, hey, sometimes weight can be dropped.
Yeah.
We don't need to carry it. We shouldn't be carrying someone else's weight if they're not willing to also help carry ours. And, you know, I think you have to assess as well how your loved one is doing mentally and like emotionally. Because
I would say that I consider you to be very adept at gauging this fine line. You just have very long-term successful relationships, Ashton. So like,
well,
no, for real, like with your friends.
they were sick with my friends. I was like,
yeah, no, I'm talking about your friends. Like your relationships span more than decades and you're so young. That's like more than half your life. So because of that, I think that you're probably better at walking that fine line than someone who is notoriously direct and can sometimes come across like, I don't know, a dude.
I appreciate all of that, but I will say once I've realized this, once I have voiced my opinion finally, it makes it a lot harder for me to keep hearing about the person and if they're still teetering on the edge of indecision. I'm like, didn't you hear what I told you? I'm like,
That's
listen,
a fair thing. That's a
it's
really
very
fair
difficult
point.
for me.
Yeah. Because
Very
like, how do you
difficult for me.
stay in integrity while you're
Right.
hearing this without saying, hey, see above? We Need to Talk is sponsored by Mindful Care. You might remember my friend, Dr. Tamir Aldad, from a few episodes back. He just texted to let me know that Mindful Care is now accepting new patients. We all know how hard it is to find an in-network psychiatrist without a long wait list, but Mindful Care can see you same or next day for medication management, recovery, and group therapy. No wait. And they take Medicaid, Medicare, and commercial insurance. Visit mindfulcare.com or text or call 516-505-7200 to book your appointment today.
So let's flip the script. What should you do if you're on the receiving end of this kind of feedback about your partner? And I have been, but I don't think I've ever been told what to do. And I think everyone's first inclination is defensiveness. So why don't you enlighten us and anyone else out there who's struggling with receiving this kind of information, or if they have received it?
Yeah, that can definitely stir up all the feelings, especially if it's unexpected or
Yeah.
honeymoon phase, you know? It's like early on, you don't expect to hear that stuff. You expect to hear mild concerns. You don't expect to hear like, I just don't think you're a good match. So I want to say of course, it's natural to feel however you feel, defensive, protective of your relationship. And it can be hard not to pull away from the person who seems skeptical. The first thing to do is to remember that you are the one in control. It does not matter what your loved ones think about your partner. If they have a modicum of emotional intelligence, which is to say, if they want you to stay in their life, they are going to find a way to support your relationship. And you have the right to be in a relationship with whomever you choose. You are the one in the driver's seat. So keeping that in mind can lower feelings of defensiveness and like wanting to murder the person in front of you who's, got the best of intentions, but is probably saying it in all the wrong ways. The second step is dialing up your curiosity, even when you're not curious. You can't understand someone's concerns if you shut them down before they're ever fully expressed.
So you mean like ask them questions, be like, okay, what are examples that made you think like this?
Well, I think that could make the other person defensive, and you have to remember that the
But if
person.
you're going to make a statement like that, you should have examples. Like you should have evidence. I think. Am I wrong?
Yeah, but it's all about the way you ask the question. So I would be
Oh.
like, if you're trying to posture a non-defensive attitude, I would be like, huh, that's interesting. Can you tell me more about that? And I would definitely watch my tone because again, recall what I just said. Your loved one is nervous as hell
Hmm.
about having this conversation with you. Remember, you're dying on the inside and clenching. They are too. Nobody wants this conversation.
Hmm.
Um, so try to stay in a curious, like non-defensive posture as you're having the conversation, because it shows that you are open to their perspective without immediately taking it as an attack. You know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? So just asking questions so that they can completely empty their thoughts.
Hmm.
Ask thought provoking questions because the person begins and then they're gauging if they have any EQ. They're gauging how that landed on you, and they're either going to share more or less based on your response. So if you posture curiosity and an openness to it, it's going to be helpful.
Hmm.
And again, remember that you're the one in control of the conversation. If the heat gets dialed up too high, you can set a boundary. You can say, listen, I appreciate your feedback. Now I need some time to like digest it all, process it
Hmm.
all. And then give yourself time to like think through what you just heard. You don't have to respond or take action right away.
Hmm.
Let the dust settle. And I would say actually that when you're escalated, that is exactly the wrong time to make a decision. So sleep on it,
Yeah.
ponder it in the days that follow. I'll say that I would caution you against sharing that feedback with your partner because your partner does not love your loved ones. They will not be as
Actually.
forgiving as you are. This
Right.
this
It's going to stick
feedback
in their
will
brain.
it will
Yeah.
sting if you share it, and there's actually no need to do that if your loved one just doesn't know the person well enough because people's opinions do change
Yes.
over time. So if you
Yeah.
think your loved one has the wrong impression, that'll self-correct over time. Don't add a complication by telling your partner because it's going to put a wedge between your partner and your loved one, and then you're going to feel
Yeah.
like you're stuck in the middle.
Well, that actually also raises an interesting question. So it's like, should we value the feedback from our friends and family pending how many times they have met our partner? So for example, if you get a bad first impression meeting somebody, like you said, people can change, their perceptions can shift. Do you think there's a certain amount of like meetings or interactions where you then think you've got a fair read on a person? And this is different for you because you're obviously a therapist and like this is your job, but
But that's interesting because I actually would want more than one impression to really land on a solid,
and
even though
everyone
I'm a shrink.
should, unless
Yeah,
it's like
to really,
blaringly like, whoa,
I mean, and there are
whoa.
some people who really trust their guts and they just think that they have their pulse on people's um
Like
on people
energy
reading.
and
Yeah, and
yeah.
like there's some I don't roll like that. I need data points. I need
Hmm.
examples. I need to be able to offer you examples. I can give you a felt sense, but I'm going to want to see something a little bit over time. Then I'm also not going to want to wait forever because like I don't know, do you feel as the one who's in the newer relationship like the window to openness to that feedback begins to close over time? You tell me.
I mean, honestly, it depends. It's very subjective because it depends on the person who's giving me the feedback and how many times that person has interacted with my partner. So, for example, like you and Steph are going to have more interactions with my partner by default because of the proximity of how close we live. Whereas my actual like parents live
Mhm.
so far away that their
The other
interactions with
two.
I'm sorry, the other two, um, the ones that created me, those people
Biologically.
biologically, their interactions with him just by logistics and default are going to be much more siphoned and contained. So I think it's hard to give an answer to that because I do think that it really does depend. Just like my friends, like everyday New York friends who spend far more time with him versus my, back home friends. It kind of really just depends on how much evidence they have to weigh in on, and
Yeah.
what I choose to share.
The other thing is that I can't help but imagine that you're going to take feedback through the lens of who the person is who's giving you that feedback.
Absolutely.
And if the
Absolutely.
person tends to be quick to judgment
Right.
and
Right.
slow to warmth,
Yeah.
that's going to be a caveat to how you process the feedback, right?
Also, if their personality is just completely different than my partner's, which like I have a few friends like that, I understand that for them, it might be a bit more difficult for them to warm up because they just like are not used to being around that type of energy, or it's different for everybody. Like I have friends where I'm like, oh, you're gonna love him. It's not gonna be a problem. And I think
Mhm.
everyone has experienced this at some point, even with other friends. It's like mixing a friend circle. Like,
It is.
how is that going to go? Personally, I just think that the most important thing to keep in mind is, okay, are they happy?
Yeah.
Is is this person making their life better in any way? Are they helping them in any way? Are they learning in any way?
Mhm.
And I think if the answer is no to any of those questions, like, okay, then maybe it's fair to come to an early assessment.
Would you rather hear an early assessment or a mid-level assessment or right before the altar assessment?
At mid-level. I would like always a mid-level assessment because I think that relationships can change and grow so much. And like, especially if you have great communication with your partner and like you're very clear on your needs and your wants, like, then it should be a mutual project.
It's interesting.
It's, I just hit a year mark of knowing my current partner. Granted, we had not been officially exclusive for a year, but dating each other. And I can say, and he will likely say it too. No, he will say it too. It's only gotten better. And I would never want where we were even like 5 months ago to be assessed by my friends and family as like the barometer of success or
Mhm.
that. So, I think it's very subjective and you have to take a lot of information into account. I also think there is just kind of like a standard for what constitutes a good person. I think that's also what you need to think about. Like, is this a good person versus
Mhm.
is this a good person for my friend?
Why do you think that distinction's important?
Oh, just because I've met some guys that my friends have dated, and I've just like I've just been trying to find the good outside
Meaning
of
in the fit versus the person? Because like
in the person, like,
oh, come on.
like,
I listen, I mean, most of the people that your friendship group has brought around me at least, they've been good humans.
because
Doesn't mean
okay,
they're
that's the only reason you met them.
does it oh, I see. So you've met ones that haven't got it.
Right. And
Okay.
historically,
All
they've
right.
not panned out for that reason. Like, I've just had like character flaw flags where I'm like, all right, you're not evil, you're not terrible, but I'm actually genuinely like, I want to know what your morals are because I'm not
Yeah.
seeing anything that speaks to that.
Oh boy,
But
we're going to talk after we're done filming today. I got to hear who these people are and why I didn't meet them. Well, I know, obviously I
well,
can
now you know.
now I know why I didn't meet them. But these sound like good stories.
So, if one of your top strengths is loyalty or perseverance, and I know people like that, does it make ending a relationship more difficult? Because you almost feel like I can imagine that you are breaking your own moral code, or you're just like going against something that you believe in.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Look, our greatest strengths, they are also our greatest weaknesses. A strength
Mhm.
becomes a weakness when it's dialed up too high in the wrong environment. So
Mhm.
loyalty means that you tend to hang in there, but you got to know when to let go or when you're passing your expiration date. And that
Yeah.
rule applies to relationships, to goals, to jobs, to projects, to just about everything. So if you're wondering if loyalty and perseverance is one of your top strengths, I will, of course, link to a survey instrument in the show notes, and you can use that to see if it comes up as one of your top 5 strengths. And if it does, let that caution you that you are predisposed to hanging in there too long. So yeah, that absolutely can be a thing. And it makes it harder to decide whether or not you're just like doing the work of relationships because they are hard. Long-term relationships are hard work.
Mm.
I'm not going to slice that bread any differently. It just is what it is. You will never meet someone who's had decades of a relationship under their belt who will tell you that it's been smooth and easy. It
Yeah.
is hard work. That said, if also one of your character strengths is perseverance and loyalty, you want to make sure that that's not dialed up so high that you like diminish the nobody wants to be in a I don't think. Maybe I should just speak for myself. I do not want to be in a relationship out of obligation, which is different from saying
No.
that I am an obligation. I am an obligation to you, Ashton. We are in a relationship, and relationships are a pain in the ass. That said, I don't want you to be in a relationship with me only because of loyalty, particularly an intimate relationship. And I would venture to say that most people's egos feel the same way. Like none of us want like that mercy relationship or that mercy loyalty.
No.
So to release someone who you know you're just with out of loyalty, that's an act of kindness. That's the appropriate thing to do. That's
Truly. And like I told my current partner, I was like, listen, if there's ever a moment in time, well, maybe not like a moment, but if you ever feel like you are not doing something that you would have done, like you truly want to do, and the reason is me, or like loyalty wise, whatever, like I want you to leave. I want you to tell me, and I want you to go because I am never going to fight for something that doesn't want me. I've already shown my worth. I've already shown my value. I will never fight with the universe about what I deserve or will have again because it's not worth it. It's like putting off the inevitable.
right.
And then you're harboring weird feelings towards each other or you get cheated on or Lord knows worse. So it's like you said, when it's dialed up too high, everyone gets hurt actually. On any
I
strength.
agree.
On any strength. It's like you could be the funniest person in the room. You tell a bad joke in the wrong room with the wrong people.
Or a good joke in the wrong room with the wrong people.
Right. Well, it's not a good joke to them.
Right.
It's
enough.
like no strength. Like you have nothing good can be dialed up like all the way before it becomes bad.
We
in my
have to have some
opinion.
control over that.
Like even
muscle so
love,
that-
like if you give way too much love, it's like it's almost too much.
I don't know how to explain that to people. We need a whole episode on that. And different from
Yeah.
love bombing, which I know has a negative
Right.
connotation. But yes, we don't get to be ourselves and like just projectile vomit all of our love onto our partner or
Just
onto someone we're courting
anyone.
and hope that they're just going to hang around and like everything is about pacing and cadence and
balance and yeah.
and
Yeah, that's a
amount.
good episode. How any
Yeah.
strength can become a weakness. Well, so what would it look like if we, speaking of strengths, trusted ourselves or weaknesses more fully to let go when a relationship has run its course and decided to believe that we're capable of finding fulfillment without that person on the other side?
I think it would not only transform the way we handle breakups, but also how we view ourselves and our potential for fulfillment. I think it would dramatically help us listen to ourselves because we would trust ourselves. And rather than wrestling with doubt or delaying the inevitable, we would just trust our intuition as a legitimate guide, which means paying attention to those quiet signs, those yellow flags of dissatisfaction or of loss of alignment, rather than dismissing it all out of fear of an ending. ending a relationship would feel less like a failure and probably more like a natural part of our story and evolution. We would understand that moving on isn't a reflection of us being inadequate, but like a
Hmm.
sign of growth and of
Growth.
change. I think
Hmm.
it would also allow us to part ways without the bitterness that so often overwhelms the ending of a relationship, so that we'd be allowed to we're just moving in different directions. It's not a shortcoming. I think it would save us so much grief because instead of spiraling into regret, we would be more forgiving of what didn't work and accept that
Hmm.
we're allowed to change over time, which would
Right.
make us less inclined to villainize our exes or hate ourselves for not seeing red flags.
I feel like so many people when they go through a breakup, even if they know it's for the best, they experience this profound sense of loss. And I think that the best, because you do in some way, but I'm like,
It
you know
is a
what
loss.
you've also lost? Dead weight. Whatever those negative feelings, like I had a friend who was so freaking anxious all the time because of her partner. So anxious. And I'm like, she's like, but I lost a partner. I'm like, do you know what else you lost? That anxiety. Or
Mm,
she was just so unhappy. And I'm like, you know what else you lost? Being unhappy on a beautiful Wednesday afternoon for no fucking reason besides another person. So it's
mhm.
like, yeah, we lost things, but we actually gained things through loss. And I realized that halfway through my other breakup. I was like, I can actually go to sleep at night and not have to worry about where my partner is or why he hasn't texted me back because I'm not worried about anyone texting me back. And
Mm.
now I know in my next relationship, which is now, that if I ever feel that way again, continuously after voicing my feedback and my issues, that person disrespects that. I'm not going to deal with that again. And
Right.
I think it's just like reframing how we see loss.
Mhm.
And
It's all in the reframe. It's all in the
yeah,
reframe.
which is
I think
hard. Don't get me wrong.
we do ourselves a disservice by viewing relationships through this lens of like must get it right.
Or
Relationships are
must
great.
have one, or must be in one. I I also will say, and this must be another episode, that every time I tell someone that I have a boyfriend now, they're like, oh my God, where'd you meet him? How'd you get that? Like, where do I find someone? This is for single people. And I'm
Mm.
like, you're acting like this is an accomplishment or some like token in the game that I just cashed out on. And I'm like, I'm not even on a dating app.
But you have to be fair. And being fair means acknowledging the societal pressure, particularly on women,
Yeah.
to
It's only when,
be in a
yeah.
relationship, to be in a relationship. I mean, the childless cat lady memes are out there for a reason because there's a cohort of the population that believes our worth is only as valuable as our ability to be in an intimate relationship and also to be pushing children out of our vaginas. I never did the latter, but I would argue I've probably raised more
You
children
have more children than
than most people on earth,
yeah.
literally. I mean, between working with teenagers for the first 15 years of my career and all of you kids that I've helped to parent, that I'm either related to directly or indirectly have come across in my life and have picked up. Women are this message, which is quite overt right now, um, has always been there in a covert way. And women, it's not lost on us. We
Mhm.
we know that people view us as more successful when we're in a long-term relationship.
Mhm.
So I shout out and empathy to people who feel like they hear Ashton's boom in another relationship and they're just like, how'd she get that? You know, we can have an episode on how to find your next great partner. And also, you don't need one to be an
Right.
amazing human.
And I didn't need one when I found one. In fact, I don't even think I wanted one. And I maybe that's exactly why it happened because I was
I
so
think it
okay
is.
with
Yeah.
being by myself that it just happened. But again, like you said, I think that's a whole nother episode, which I'm already looking forward to.
And I think, just to close this out, that the way to view relationships, particularly ones that don't go on for life, which are most of our relationships,
Mhm.
they're mostly not going to go on for life. Can we begin to view them as growth opportunities where we
Right.
learn more about ourselves, we learn
Yeah.
relationship skills that we can then bring to the next relationship? And can we start seeing all of our relationships, especially our long-term intimate relationships, as like a bachelor's degree that we're getting, just like another learning experience. And that way, letting go isn't about giving up. It's about making space for like a new experience and new
Yeah.
connections that may better match who you're becoming. It's not about clinging on to fear. It's not about clinging on to habit, but allowing yourself to grow and knowing that every ending, I don't mean to sound like a walking meme, but every ending is a new beginning.
It
And
is.
and that
It
helps
is.
us
Like,
align with a different kind of trust.
and
You
move
know,
on
the
quicker.
ability to trust ourselves is
Mhm.
what I'm talking about. And
Yeah.
that is so important because if you can trust yourself and your own judgment, then you're never alone because you always have that ability. And that's the kind of trust that keeps you open to the possibilities and the belief that whatever is going to happen next is what's supposed to happen next,
Mhm.
is you're trusting your God.
Yeah. I feel like it's okay to fail the test as long as you pass the class. And I feel like overwhelmingly too, when my friends go through breakups, they're like, oh, I feel so stupid. Or I feel like I wasted my time. It's like, don't think that way because you learned so much. And it just means that you're going to be even better on the next one. You're going to just get another better one. Like
And
if you
by the
learn,
way, right, by the way, you had to learn that. You
right,
had to learn
you
that.
had to,
So would you rather learn it now in this relationship,
right.
or do you want to repeat that in your next relationship? Like, who do you want your dress rehearsals to be with? Do you want them to be with your
Ooh,
spouse? Do you
right.
want them to be with your
Do you
spouse?
want to be in the
Or do you
first quarter or the fourth quarter?
or do you want them to be with people with whom there's no deep consequences to it not working out? Like, better to sort that all out in the earlier relationships. That's the
Yeah.
whole point of it all. And yeah. Yeah, that's all I got, man. That's all I got. I need you to read
And
us
on
out.
that note, we need to talk with Dr. Darcy Sterling as a Sterling Standard production. Editing and sound engineering by Bart Miguel. Our theme music is by Trending Music. Special thanks to Amanda Christiani and Preston Smith. If you know someone who's in a relationship that may have passed its expiration date, feel free to share this episode with them. We'll be back on Tuesday with another episode packed with the relationship, dating, and mental health hacks you've come to expect.
Thank you, Ashton.
Thank you.